Welcome back to Why Should We Care About African Data Centers, a podcast where we tackle the big questions shaping the industry. I come from a middle-sized Finnish town called Tampere. Just 20 kilometers away is a small town called Nokia. Yes, the one that gave its name to what would become one of the most iconic tech companies in the world. Nokia started in the 1860s as a pulp mill and grew into a global conglomerate, producing everything from rubber and tires to cables, electronics, and televisions, before evolving into the tech and telco giant we know today. For many of us, it was the brand behind our first mobile phone. While the phone business is no longer its main focus, Nokia never left the stage. Today, it's a key player in a global digital infrastructure, building the networks that connect our devices, cities, and increasingly our data centers. My guest today is Toni Pellegrino. We talk about Nokia's deep roots on the continent, from building early telegraph lines to deploying high-capacity fiber networks. Toni shares what it takes to deliver digital infrastructure across such a diverse region and why creating jobs is just as important as expanding connectivity. Here's my conversation with Toni Pellegrino.
Yeah, Willem, first of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. Really looking forward for this chat with you. I'm Toni Pellegrino. I'm the managing director of Nokia South Africa, based in Johannesburg. And another role that I do have in Nokia, beyond this one, is taking care of the network infrastructure business for Nokia on the East Africa, Horn of Africa, and Southern Africa. So quite a diverse number of countries with all the different detail. But one thing put them all together, they all need digital infrastructure.
Exactly. So, what initially brought Nokia to the African market, and what was the company's vision at the time?
Look, if you look, Nokia today is, through the different acquisition that we went through, is really the DNA of multiple company. As you know, we acquired Siemens Telecommunication, Motorola, Alcatel-Lucent, and just recently Infinera. But if we look specifically in Africa, as part of Siemens in 1860, Nokia, Siemens at the time, was building the first telegraph line between Simonstown and Cape Town in 1860. So somehow Nokia presence on the African continent is older than Nokia itself, which is 150 plus years old. So it's very interesting, and we never left the continent over the year. And we have been growing, known majority for the mobile phone in the past, then for really today is the strongest part of our portfolio being the 4G, 5G network. But over the last couple of years, we become an extremely important player in terms of digital infrastructure. And digital infrastructure is optical network, IP network, fixed network that help communication service provider, enterprise, data center player, and wholesaler player across the continent. So is a strong presence on the continent, understanding real the challenge that the continent has, and see how we can resolve them, because we really believe, especially now, that the digital gap is a digital opportunity to lift up and bring a lot of people in the employment market by new jobs that digital economy will create.
150 plus years. That's some history on the continent.
Yeah.
That comes with a lot of perspective. You spoke about this on kind of on a headline level, but could you speak more in detail about like how has Nokia's role evolved as Africa's digital infrastructure has developed, like from the early telecoms days to today's digital age?
Look, I like to say that the digital infrastructure initially was used to connect the base station. When mobile operator came on the continent, there was no copper, there was no infrastructure, so a lot was done with microwave. And when the technology evolved from 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G now, and discussing 5G advanced and 6G is already in the labs preparing for the next wave, of course, the infrastructure required was fiber. So we saw a lot of fiberization of the networks across Africa. And that's where our portfolio, especially after the acquisition of Alcatel-Lucent in 2017, is become really a growing part of our business, where operator cannot just rely anymore on microwave to connect 4G, 5G site, they need fiber. But then the fiber is also required by enterprise, and they starting to use services directly to connect their internal data center. And also fiber is connecting the end user, because we moved from the ADSL to fiber, but the copper was never usually deployed in Africa. Maybe exception of South Africa that had at the time 4 million copper line. The fiberization is really an opportunity for the continent. So we see that fiber need to go between the data center, need to connect enterprise, and need to connect the end user. And for that, they need trusted company like Nokia to bring the light to those fiber. And that's what we really see our role in Africa is really lighting up this fiber and connecting more people, connecting the enterprise, connecting the data center, and still, of course, very important part, connecting the base station from our mobile operator. But that's where the real need of digital infrastructure is growing, because today an enterprise customer or a data center may generate much more traffic than a usual mobile operator will need to connect its base station on an optical link.
Africa has a reputation of being, let's say, a different continent to operate in than the rest of the continent. So could you speak about some of the key lessons Nokia has learned over the years from operating in Africa?
Let me give you a personal perspective. It is now 15 years that I moved from Europe to Africa. And one thing that you learn being on the continent is that anything that could go wrong will potentially go wrong, because is one continent, but is multiple country with multiple legislation, multiple cultural aspect that you need to take care of. And I would say sometimes as European, we are blindsided. We come here, we believe that is Africa. I mean, we all have a joke where you're living in South Africa and say, oh, I have a friend living in Nigeria. Yeah, it's quite a long flight to get from South Africa to Nigeria. But I think is understand Africa in its diversity and what bring also the continent together. I believe over the last couple of years, especially in the business, is really listening to the people locally, is really learning from them and not coming with bias and predefined view on how business should be done. And that's what we believe at Nokia we're taking all the time. We have been on the continent, as I told you, since 1860 in this different shape or format or name. And we would have not been on this continent for so long if we didn't take a long-term perspective. There are more challenges. For example, to importing good in a specific country, you believe that is take 20 steps, but then the reality, once you start the project, you may have to add another 40 steps. But that is the experience that you take, and that's the experience that we keep when it comes to deploy and interconnect two data center or building an optical corridor across multiple countries. You need to understand the diversity in each region that you're going to cross and each country that you're going to cross. And that's all this knowledge that we take very seriously, understanding, listening to the customer, and adapting our way in order to make sure that it suits the reality of the terrain that we are deploying. But one thing that we never compromise is ethics and our compliance. We as Nokia, we have been 9 times awarded as the most ethical company. And we believe that even on the African continent that has a lot of bad press sometimes, you can do ethical business with companies that share the same value than Nokia and other European suppliers.
So even if the kind of operations require localized thinking and localized solutions, the values remain the same for Nokia. So there's no different, there's no Africa values for making business in Africa, but it's a global Nokia still.
But I think it goes further, Ville. Is innovation is also possible in Africa, and maybe the personal, but I feel that it was the case 15 years ago, 20 years ago. There was this cliche that we could take technology from 1-2 generation older and bring it to Africa to connect people. But actually, it's not true. If you're a businessman in Lagos, in Nairobi, or in Johannesburg, you have the same need that when you are in New York City, or in London, or in Helsinki. So, for that point of view, I think is that innovation is also possible. And because you're on a continent that it's still very young, you're still going to have more people coming. When I say young in terms of youth population, you're going to have a lot of more need to develop skill. So it means that potentially you're going to need to do the same, but with less. That's why innovation becomes very much important. And we have seen in, for example, in connecting people to fiber to the home, where we could bring innovation, digitalization of the process on how you deploy fiber network in low income, high density area, and how you support that with software to make it sure that when you're going to have a problem later, you have the right information, that you waste less time finding out. So innovation can also be driven by the market condition that we have in Africa. And I believe Africa potential is among us. So you must think at scale from the beginning and not losing your value. As you mentioned, rightfully so. We don't lose a value as Nokia, but we are very proud to localize a lot of people in our operation. For example, in South Africa, more than 85% of our staff are South African. And when we launched a network with Safaricom in Ethiopia, I was very proud to see engineers from Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, all jointly adding a new chapter of the digital life of the country. And that's really what we want. And the same we are doing now, pathing that and skilling more inside the country. So skill, it's always something on the back of our mind as a Nokia on the African continent, because that's the only way to be sustainable on the long term.
Exactly. And just thinking about the, as you said, the importance of this African continent for the future is that I think it's in 20 years, 95% of the global population growth is going to happen in the continent. Yeah. Those numbers are incredible. So that also means the opportunity will be incredible.
To give you a number, by 2035, we believe that there's going to be 300 million young people that will look for jobs on the African continent. 300 additional million people young looking for jobs. And if we are not providing them opportunity that the digital infrastructure and the digital economy can provide, most probably only half of them may find a job. That's why it's becoming is a business prerogative. That's why sustainability in the business is essential. You cannot do business based on grant on the continent. There need to be projects that have a clear path, a clear execution on how you're going to develop them over the years to remain sustainable, bringing value for the shareholder, but at the same time, closing the digital gap that we all know could have the risk of leaving people behind.
Yes, that's an important topic. So, and it also gives us a bit of a bridge to our next theme, which is the future. So, looking ahead, what are Nokia's strategic focus areas in Africa, particularly in emerging sectors like data centers and AI-driven networks?
Look, Ville, I will leave aside the fact that we still believe that a lot of people on the continent still don't have a 4G coverage or are not even evolved to 5G, and that the fact that there is a major challenge with reducing the cost to access those mobile technology. But what we believe on the network infrastructure part, which is one of the major pillars of the business group of Nokia, is that we see more people need to access to affordable, abundant, and secure data. And that's really important because if today you cannot consume, let's say, 1 or 2 gig of data per day, you might be connected, but you're still not digitally enabled. So I think it's really an industry problem that we as a supplier, our customer, plus all the stakeholder need to act together to resolve. So we believe that secure, affordable, and abundant data in a sustainable business case is one for the people is one part of the equation. And we believe that today you need to be able to provide this 1-2 gig a day, I would say less than $1 a day at a speed of 50 to 100 meg. That's where the vision. And we have some good innovation that happened on the continent with some of our customers, showing that there is a potential scenario to address that. But once you provide that on the access, they're going to consume data that are coming from a data center, whatever it is, public, private, or from the bank for doing banking, whatever. And those data centers are becoming even more crucial as enterprise and individual are adopting more and more AI. For generative AI, just to write a summary about an article, or for a process to improve the logistical flow that a company will use, or if it is to automate certain process and make your network even more mission critical. So the data center is no more just a source of data, of information, but it becoming a mission critical component of the digital service used by the consumer, by the government, the enterprise, or the larger corporate. And what we see is those data centers in Africa are being built especially by the demand and the growth by the hyperscaler. The hyperscaler see its population on the continent growing. They see its thirst of more services. And you cannot deliver the service with a data center outside the continent. They need to become part of the continent. And that's why we see more data centers be built in Kenya, in South Africa, and Nigeria, in sub-Saharan Africa. We see that in sub-Saharan Africa as the three main locations. But we start to see other countries that has also a lot of potential for data center, for the hyperscaler and other companies to be built. We see a lot of data center be built in Angola and then in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has a special situation with the power cost being very low in compared to Kenya, but Angola has a lot of landing station from the subsea cable, and so does Kenya. So there is this first step of data center be built around those interesting countries where there is a benefit, whatever is power or whatever is connectivity. And we're going to see those data centers growing and building more edge data center in the so landlocked country. And when you want to connect those data centers, you need to have a partner that can build a trusted optical corridor, what we call data center interconnect. And that's where we as Nokia are very strong on the continent. And that's the one on Q1, based on external report, we are number one in terms of optical network as Nokia, because there is a lot of demand in that area. And that's also one of the reasons of the acquisition of Infinera, not specific for Africa, for globally, for more optical market. It's very important because it's not only, as I mentioned before, connecting base station or connecting mobile network, it's connecting those data center. And the capacity requirement is very huge. And what I see then at this step is how we're going to automate more inside the data center. And that's why Nokia also took a decision to invest over the next 3 years more than $100 million a year in all area required to build more capacity and competence into the data center fabric. Because the data center fabrics, the IP, the router, and the switcher inside the network are becoming very important. While you're connected with data center interconnect, inside the data center, the intelligence and the automation is also required. And that's where we see a major opportunity. We already had a deal that was officially announced with Microsoft, a further extension over 5 years, that Microsoft is using Nokia inside their data center. So we already have some credibility in those domains. And we believe if we go back in Africa, we believe we're going to have more data center being built. We believe that the total addressable market for data center in Africa will grow to more than $5 billion by 2026. This is based on a study of the Digital Council Africa. And we want to position Nokia to build those trusted optical corridor, to be inside the data center, to build the automation and the trusted connectivity inside in order to support the load that AI will put into the data center and into the traffic that will go across the network. And these are the basics. I I have a colleague of mine always say, we need to do the plumbing first. Like when you have a house, you need to do the plumbing. And those optical corridor across Africa is like the plumbing for the data center and for the networks that need to be connected. So we really believe that this intelligent plumbing, it's a necessity today. But it goes down to the fiber, to the power. Today, I believe data center have seen some delay in how they were deployed because access to power is still a challenge in some country, or the cost of power is very high. And then you will find out that the fiber quality that cross a country, for example, like DRC, that suffer of multiple fiber cut, will not provide the quality required when the data center and AI needed for government, enterprise, and consumer is becoming mission critical. So they will need to have a diversification of terrestrial corridor in Africa, north, south, east, west. And that's why we really hope that the European Union, with the Global Gateway Initiative, will even help to accelerate the deployment of those corridors. And at the same time, you're going to need to have power, which is very important in order to supply the energy needed for those data centers. And you're going to have intelligent building because those data centers become critical area to have building technology to keep those data centers safe. So what I say is it's not only an effort of Nokia, but I believe in is acting together with partner. We also announced a partnership with Lenovo, for example, earlier this year. But it is also how we can go cross industry, because a data center today is a building, and there is many company in the building automation, also from Germany, very good in that domain. There is power need. There's a lot of company in the power domain coming from Europe. And there is champion of technology like Nokia also providing that. So I really think going forward, we may all chase a different part of the pie, but it's how those European company can work together, and how can we get European funding that believe in a sustainable business case in order to build those data center that are going to need to provide job for those 300 million young people that will come by 2035.
Exactly. And actually, you build a brilliant bridge to the next theme once again. Thank you for that. Yeah. So Nokia obviously you have your focus areas in Africa, and you're already doing the business, and you are a respected and big player in the continent. But given that there is so much to build still in the continent, so what would be your message to the other European companies that are still kind of pondering whether the African market is for them? Like, why should more European companies pay attention to Africa's digital transformation? What's the opportunity?
I think the opportunity sometimes is very well quantified, and we have seen the IFC, different DFI or ECA really seeing the opportunity. I think is spending some time by understanding with the people that are willing to invest. And it's going to be a collaboration, public and private. But the private sector in Africa, in my view, has shown to be extremely resourceful. And we have seen how the private sector supported after the pandemic for the distribution of the vaccine on the continent. So it was really something that it's quite normal when there is a challenge, the private public sector help, but the private sector is quite active. And we have seen a lot of new operator coming into the market, providing this connectivity solution. And we have seen companies starting with a small seed capital, becoming very large. I would not say a unicorn because there might not be $1 billion valuation, but let's call it a unicorn at the African level. And I think that's what the European funding mechanism, whatever are the EIB, the DFI, the ECA, need to work together on starting to also support some of those business cases much earlier. And because it might not be always the big one that's going to do the investment. Just to give you an example, in my business, I will not mention name, but I have more than 20% of my business growing toward 30% that is coming from new company than potentially 5 years ago or 10 years ago, we didn't even have the logo on our radar, which tell us the dynamism and of the private sector. And those companies are now sustainable. They provide service, good return for their shareholder. And that's what I think is very important. While we continue to work with the big player on the continent, like the Vodacom, MTN, or Airtel, Orange, we also see a lot of new builder. And this new builder may not tick all the boxes that a big player like the previous that I mentioned would tick. And that's what we need to ask at the financing communities, to find a way on how to be flexible enough. And we have seen a lot of improvement in terms of their offering, and potentially not looking alone only to one part, the telecom part, looking at end to end, and forcing maybe us as a European company on the continent to work more together. Because then we will bring not a $10 million project, we will bring a $100 million project. If we put, for example, for a data center, the power, the building, and the technology part. And I think that might be also a way to de-risk the profile of the opportunity, because if 2-3 European companies are working on the same project, then definitely there might be more risk assessment done by companies sharing the same value and being trusted by the market.
So more collaboration among the European players, backed up with more support, like institutional support from the investors and EU Commission and such. So
And seed
that's
capital, seed capital as well.
and seed
And
capital.
I think most of the time we have great opportunity, but because it's in a new country and they don't have 3 years of balance sheet or P&L to prove for the due diligence, doesn't mean that the opportunity is not valid. And most of the time, our financing capability, it's more towards something that is already kind of established. And we have seen FinFund, it was a public reference. FinFund took a bet by investing a small initial capital into FiberTime. They are doubling this capital now. And now FiberTime has grown to be a successful company. And it shows, is a proof that it makes sense sometimes to look at disruptive new model and to have the initial investment.
Great. So finally, still talking about the European companies potentially exploring whether the African market. So especially for those who are still kind of worried about the timing, the risk, or the market fit, what's your message to these European companies?
Okay, I think the data speak by itself. I mean, if we look about the young people that will be coming in the continent, growing in the continent, and by being an average age lower, many African countries have an extremely lower average. Is there going to be a need of digital service for them? Because they're going to have the same need if they would be in Europe or other. And building the infrastructure around to allow those systems to work, if it goes beyond just putting a 5G coverage, we need to build the basics, which is the fiber, the plumbing, the data center, the heart, with the intelligence, with the brain that's going to be the AI that's going to use. And I believe there's going to be plenty of, once you are on the continent, and not just fly in, fly out, once you're on the continent, you're going to find out that there is a lot of private company from the African continent that can also support us European company to drive innovation because of the specificity of the challenge of the terrain. And that can become also an export opportunity for European companies, meaning you can duplicate certain model in Africa in other part where you have similar challenges, whatever it is Southeast Asia or in some part of Latin America. And that's what I believe is really make Africa such a special place. I mean, we keep saying that the Homo sapiens first started in Kenya and then moved to Europe, and for certain way also in the digital world, I believe there are certain challenge that we can solve here, and the risk. A lot of European company that want to come making business in Africa are always scared about usual risk, or are the customer going to repay us, or do we going to have a problem of crime, or problem of travel, or logistic problems and other. I think all of them can be, those mountains can be high. You can hike them, and you can go over it and cross them. Because if you build a team that understand the local reality, and you join them with some of our knowledge that we bring when you have, and if both parts are humble enough, willing to listen to each other, you act together and you resolve those problems. That's why at Nokia we believe that everything we do, and we don't just build technology for the sake of technology, is to resolve challenges, but it needs one fundamental. We need to act together. And just European company, you're not on Africa. Come on the continent. There is enough company like Nokia, Siemens, other that have spent a lot of years on the continent and have built some lesson learned. And build your network across those different companies, work together, listen from each other, and potentially a data center will become a common opportunity that we can all work together. And we have seen also with Finnish company coming into South Africa and leveraging what we already have learned and what we can share with them to make their journey easier. But you need to first put your feet into the water before you can swim.
I agree 100%, Tony. For myself, having worked on the continent for like 10, 11, 12 years, I realized that you have to actually live here, not just travel back and forth. You have to live and feel and build those networks here to be able to thrive as a business. Okay, that's it from my side. Is there something that you would like to highlight still? We can have this extra bonus round if there's something that
Yeah.
you felt like
Well,
you'd like
look,
to add.
there's one thing that, yeah, maybe there's one thing that I maybe would like to add as closing. I think such initiative as this one that you're doing with those podcasts, and the numerous visits that I have from many DFI, ECA coming, spending time. I'm really seeing the European Union and the member starting to be really interested what's happening in Africa. And what I should say over the last 4 or 5 years is with open mind. And some of them are already at the fearless level. I would say that they want to make it happen, and they will bring the funding, the seed capital, like I mentioned. And I should really also mention that FinFund has shown this fearless approach in some of the projects that we work together. And I believe it's important that European presence is more felt on the African continent, because there is a lot of opportunity that Africa and Europe can do together. And I believe if we don't take this opportunity, it may go somewhere else. And I think that would be the big failure for us as European company, because we do have the technology, we do have the different sector, we do have the willingness, there is also the capital, and it's just about putting those pieces of the puzzle together, put a sustainable business case, and the opportunity is there to be done, and adding a lot of value in everyday's life of an individual or a company or a government, because we share a lot of value with a lot of African country. Because whatever our past sometimes was bad or good, we still have a shared past that we have learned from each other. And as European on the African continent, we did do our mistakes, but at the same time, I think we learned a lot on how to work together for the value for the African continent, and not just to export value outside. Because that's, if we take from a historical point of view, that's what was happening. It was a colonization, and the value was exported outside the continent. Now, as European companies, when we work on the African continent, is to add and leave value on the continent. And that's what's really a major difference that I believe from other continent and country very active in Africa.
This podcast is part of the Data Governance in Africa initiative, helping the African Union shape data policies, enable cross-border data flows, and build secure, sustainable digital infrastructure. Funded by the EU and 5 member states, it supports a unified digital market in Africa.